For more is Dr. Emmanuel Navon, Senior Fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Emmanuel, thanks for coming in. What are we to make of Iran sounding more optimistic notes going into this round? Is it progress or perhaps just reacting to the impatience we're seeing on the part of the U.S. and European powers?
I think the Iranians realized that they're not going to be able to play around with the United States forever. They cannot play full time indefinitely because the U.S. already made very clear that in a couple of weeks, if they're convinced that no agreement can be reached, they will pull the plug on those negotiations. But you mentioned before that the U.S. and its allies are trying to revive the 2015 JCPOA. It cannot be revived because in the meantime, the Iranians have made a lot of progress in enriching uranium. So we're not talking today about going back in time, but in trying to reach an agreement that, again, will block Iran in its process of enriching uranium. But of course, if we negotiate forever, in the meantime, Iran will become a threshold state, and those negotiations will become pointless, which is exactly what the Biden administration is saying.
Right. Of course, I didn't mean literally revive to the down detail, the 2015 agreement. There have been all kinds of ideas floated, maybe even the partial agreement, one way to buy time, some kind of partial limitation on Iran's program in return for a partial lifting of sanctions. Now, it's the Iranians that have rejected that in the past, saying it's all or nothing. Is it perhaps that could be something we're going to see, something which, of course, Israel is very also objected to?
Well, yeah, Israel objects these sanctions to be lifted without a full, stopping of the Iranian nuclear program. But as I've said before and explained, I think here is that it's very hard for the United States to have a real leverage on the Iranians because the Iranians benefit from the economic backing and cooperation of China and to a lesser extent of Russia. And you no longer have this cooperation between the permanent members of the Security Council, which you had before the JCPOA with international sanctions. Today, we see that the U.S. sanctions alone are not able to stop Iran from progressing with its nuclear program, which is a real problem. And I think the Americans realize this also, which I think is why they just announced that as far as they're concerned, there's going to be a deadline. And after a couple of weeks, they'll stop those negotiations. So I think we'll, by the beginning of 2022, we shall know whether or not these negotiations are going anywhere and whether or not the United States will maybe think about a different option to stop Iran from becoming nuclear. And we know that the Biden administration has announced many times officially that it opposes a nuclear Iran.
Right. And we know also, as we heard in Ellie's VTR, budgeting in Israel seems like it's for a possible military strike. And of course, the U.S. is participating in these drills in the spring that could simulate an attack on Iran. But I guess we'll also know, we heard Foreign Minister Lapid, if Israel's arguments have in the end of the day held any weight in Washington with the Biden administration. Dr. Emmanuel Navon, thank you for joining us again on the